Okay, join me again to look at and self-expose this person known as Without History. It's hilarious he chose that name, but he wants to play on that and say, you said we didn't have any history, and then he comes out with all these lies that are supposed to be their history. After the Cleopatra debacle, I wanted to explain to people that no, it's just not Egypt and Africa that they want to claim. And in fact, Macedonian Greeks were Bantu somehow too, with that Cleopatra thing. But it's worse than that. They've actually claimed all kinds of people, including the Etruscans, which I showed a video on, and even the Greeks, the Moors, the ancient North African Caucasians. But it gets worse. It can go all over the place. In fact, what we're looking at today is what he calls the black origins of Sumerian civilization. Oh yes, believe it or not, we've gotten there with this idea of we was the first, but still unable to do anything like it to this day. It's kind of self-exposing. Well, it's really self-exposing, but let's look into this, and you'll recognize the voice as being the guy that does the voiceover of at least 3 different channels that I've done debunks on. Looks like a Caucasian to me.
The Black African Beginnings of Sumer extract from the documentary, The Definitive Ancient History of Black People. Nevertheless, by 4000 BC, a little east from Kemet, the Sumerian civilization was starting to take root in the valley shaped by the Tigris and Euphrates.
Yep, it sure did. In the Caucasian civilization, right there with the Tigris and Euphrates, one of them coming directly out of the Caucasus Mountains. And this was the place of the Sumerians called Eden, which was their fertile land between the Tigris and Euphrates. It's where the Bible comes from and so on. And so you can imagine why they desperately want to claim that, because they wish they were the people that were talked about in the Bible, which everybody in humanity knows that they weren't, but they can't keep themselves from trying to put themselves in that situation. Here's something neat about this. This is a Lamassu. Yeah, it's part lion, part bull, part eagle, part man. Like some kind of manticore situation. Well, yeah, kind of like that too. What is that? Well, that's the 4 cardinal points of the zodiac that they had going on. It's pretty amazing, yeah. Though you might be able to take this depiction and pull something out of it like an angel, or especially the ones on the wall where it just shows the man there with those same wings. It's where we get that whole concept from, but none of this comes from sub-Saharan Africans, but he's gonna try to just wheedle on out there like somebody just waltzed on out and did something that never really happened.
Here, I would be remiss if I didn't quote the historian Runoko Rashidi in his seminal paper on the origin of Sumer and Elam.
Not quite sure who Romo Rashidi is, but if he's trying to tout that black people were there in any way, he's probably part of that Afrocentric crew. He says he's going to quote something, but instead he doesn't quote it, he just puts it on this paper. And I'm guessing he doesn't know how to edit and do things real good. Now, I misspoke at the first part of it. This isn't somebody's voice that I've noticed. No, this is whenever you choose a black person to just read off things, and he's got it read out. That's the reason it said part this, at the very first of it, which really wasn't supposed to be spoken out. He doesn't know how to do this yet, and I guess he thought he'd throw a picture in here of these words, and somehow off the picture it would just pick up the words. It doesn't work that way. You have to like use the closed caption thing, and then it says it out to you in a fake voice, probably because he doesn't want to use his own. Many scholars have concluded that the founders of the first Mesopotamian civilization were black Sumerians. No one really has that's an accredited or a believable scholar in any way, shape, or form. I'll let you know that off the bat. Mesopotamia was the biblical land of Shinar, Sumer, which sprung up around 3000 BC. Well, it's really like 3200 BC, but then it actually goes back to about 5200 BC in the same area. Then we have the Elamites that are over here that take it over after the Great Flood, that gets twisted into the idea of Noah's flood in the Bible, where Noah landed in the Caucasus Mountains, and all three of his kids supposedly founded these civilizations, showing you a connective with people that were running this. We'll get into that here in a minute. After deciphering the cuneiform script and researching ancient Mesopotamia for many years, Henry Rawlinson, 1810 to 1895, discovered that the founders of the civilization were of Kushite origin. No, this is a similar people that were in the Hindu Kush mountains and so on, so you're kind of getting it twisted a little bit and probably don't know what you're talking about. But he made it clear that the Semitic speakers of Akkad and non-Semitic speakers of Sumer were both black people who called themselves Ziggurats, or blackheads. No, that's not correct either. In fact, it's pretty telling when you find out the reality of it. What they said was the rulers said that they ruled over the black-headed people. So now we have somebody ruling over black-headed people, and black people do not want to put themselves in that situation. Well, here I'll get you out of it very easily. Whenever I said red-headed person, you don't think that's a person that's red, do you? If I say blonde-headed person, you don't think that's a person that's blonde all over, do you? Whenever I say black-headed people, you don't think that their skin is black. You think it's their hair. So they ruled over the dark-haired people that live there. I've shown videos verifying this fact. In a minute, I'll show you some more of it. But this was also the same statement that was said in ancient Egypt, that they ruled over the dark-headed people, or black-headed people. Now, they ruled over the Nubians too. That's not what they're talking about. Right. So, black-headed never meant and never will mean black-skinned, because it's not. And therefore we have a problem with mental issue here, wanting to try to pull that into the idea, well, we've got blackheads. Dude, the people that keep touting this are West Sub-Saharans that didn't know any of this existed. It's pretty disgusting whenever you get into the idea of what they're trying to say versus the reality of any of it. John Baldwin wrote in his book Prehistoric Nations in 1869 that the upper early colonists of Babylonia were the same race as the inhabitants of the upper Nile. Now, of course, because blacks want to believe that they knew the Nile existed, which West Sub-Saharans didn't either, and they're going to try to correlate that with black people. The Egyptians were always Caucasians, and in fact, in the first and earliest of dynasties, they had a Nordic people there. I can show you, I've showed in a recent video, actually a couple of them where I showed it, where in Egyptologist 7 debunks this other Afrocentric where he tried to use this information in this old paper from 1836, and in doing so she found the paper and pulled it up and he go, well, this isn't saying anything like you are. In fact, it's talking about Nordic cranial shapes and that they were the ones that ruled the earliest dynasties and pyramid builders. And then they come to their former glory about the 18th dynasty. This is the time of Akhenaten and King Tut and so on. Oh, it's really exposing. So whenever they talk about them being the same inhabitants of that, that's what they're talking about. And this was before they have DNA or anything. They're working off craniometry and going, well, I see a lot of Mediterraneans here, and they're ruling over those. But apparently the people that are in the nobility situation are more Nordic, more brachycephalic, more this. A little different and special. No one, if you look up any of these papers, is mentioning black people. And John Baldwin did not say Egypt or the evidence of the Upper Nile were ever black people. Let's continue.
While these salient facts regarding Sumer's obvious cultural genius are well known, the important question of the racial composition of its population is generally glossed over.
No, it's not. It's been well studied. In fact, Sir Edward Worley, whenever he first started digging in Sumer, ended up finding graves of the earliest times and so on, and where he did, he said, these are the scions of the Caucasian race. And blah, 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 da, da, da. And then he started digging up blue-eyed statues all over the place, and it just reconfirmation of confirmation of confirmation. Of course, during this time, we were still having a little bit of trouble fighting off a biblical idea that the world was only 4,000 BC old, in the face of looking at dinosaur fossils. So you can see how that all kind of had problems whenever it first came out. But they always try to say it's, oh, white superiority, this, that, and the other. Blacks weren't involved with any of this. So you would just put a dash next to their name. You'd be like, NA, non-applicable. But they don't like that. In a modern day, when we're so used to pandering them and trying to race swap in all these movies, they seem to kind of expect the idea that you're going to just try to agree with them on the fact that they created your civilization, writing, math, all kinds of things. Yes, it was them that came up with it. Who? The pre-Neolithic, non-biblical, recent primitives that live way over here in the jungle and didn't even know the world existed. Oh wow, that's quite a chunk of poop to swallow there. It's amazingly sad how this looks to all the people who have any education whatsoever, or just breathe in and out oxygen. Let's continue.
This apparent cloud concerning race, however, is very thin, and there is a substantial body of evidence in support of the position that the civilization of Sumer was the product of black migrations from Africa's Nile Valley.
Well, first of all, it's impossible to have a black migration from Nile Valley. Whenever there's a price on Nubians' heads, they're not allowed to come into or through Egypt in any way, shape, or form. Oh, I'm just lollygagging around. No. And the price was worth more than a live one. And all you had to have to prove it was the right hand. So you could bring them a few hands and make some money. There were people that hunted them like that, like the Garamontes that Herodotus talks about. We don't need to get into that in this video. But let's see what this says right here above it here. Many scholars have concluded that the founders of Mesopotamian civilization were black Sumerians. It's not true at all. I don't know why he flips back and forth and makes this go in there. I think it's because it didn't read the words out, and he thought he'd try again and see if it would read a picture. It's past pathetic, this, oh, come out of the Nile Valley. Well, way, way up the Nile, past where it's the Nile. You know, we didn't even know where the start of the Nile was. Well, Stanley and Livingston, Dr. Livingston, I presume. You know what I'm talking about? That's when we truly figured out where it was. You look at all the Herodotus maps, and they think it curls around all the way back into far northwest Africa, into the Atlas Mountains. It also says Atlantis right there, too, in ancient maps. But on that ancient map, there isn't even a sub-Sahara that exists. And in turn, sub-Saharans didn't know the world existed. There were some Nubian people that met up with Egypt, but they weren't even allowed into Egypt and so on by decrees. And the decrees say forever. So to think that you just went lollygagging out to Levant and created a civilization is quite a farcical, laughable tale.
And there is a substantial body of evidence in support of the position that the civilization of Sumer was the product of black migrations from Africa's Nile Valley.
There's really none whatsoever. I've been doing this for decades, and I have never heard of such a situation except for coming out of the mouth of a lying Afrocentric. There's been no one else that tried to equate it to anything else other than that. The question is whether or not they were all Aryan types, or if the Aryan type ruled over and got with these guys here, and together they formed Voltron, because that's what it seems like it appears happened in ancient Egypt and everywhere else. So there's an important component in this starting up of civilization that we have, and I've showed it in quite a few videos. But the one thing that is not in the equation, not important, negligible, and really unknown, are black people at this time. So amazingly, it's quite, and usually as always, the total opposite of what they try to say.
This is not to argue that ancient Sumer was exclusively peopled by blacks, or that the Africans were the only early ethnic entity in the area.
Oh, well, that's just so nice of you. You want to say that, no, well, it's not saying that they were all black people. Like somehow they're giving in that statement, aren't they? Oh, they're just so gracious. You know, if we were to say there was a black person in Sumer, although he was sticking out like a sore thumb and out of place, it still would be a lie. Yeah, definitely. The first showing in the Near and Middle East of anybody that looked like a Nubian, other than the Egyptians, was the Akkadians, way after the 25th dynasty, so well late in the whole situation, and it shows them taking over Egypt, and then they made them wash their gold and do things like that. Who? The people from the Nubians that came in and took over Egypt for like 92 years. Yeah, they easily could tell which ones were which too, by the way. But blacks don't like that idea too. See, they're trying to get past Egypt and swim on out there and become the biblical people and the people of Sumer and stuff, and instead of themselves already. And they think they've swam out there and done it. Only they're not known for swimming and didn't know any of this existed. It's past pathetic. Let's continue.
Sumer was at the crossroads of Asia, Africa, and Europe, and over the millennia there was a great deal of foreign intrusions and racial intermingling.
This is usually the excuse of why there's nothing to show for it now, is that, oh, there was invasions, like they try to do with Egypt. And when you say, when did this happen? And they try to give you a date or something, and you go, no, King Tut's DNA is this, that, and the other. So, oh, well, it was just before that. And then you go, no, here's the 4th dynasty, the people that actually built the pyramids with crystal blue eyes and pale women. And it's easily to tell at this time, too, their phenotypes. So what are you going to go with? Oh, well, it was just before that. Oh, so y'all didn't build any pyramids or do anything. Then they start crying and freaking out. And you go, you know, we have a Nakata, too, Ginger, the blonde-haired Gibelline mummy of the pre-dynastic. What we don't have is any black people ever. Isn't that quite telling? His last statement here, though, was that Sumer is at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe. I don't know if he's that bad at geography or not, but the thing that's the point between them would be 2 points. Between Europe and Asia is the Caucasus Mountains. Persis River, whatever, that's what they declamated it as, where you could start saying it's Europe. By the way, Europa is a Phoenician princess. You end up going to the Minoans, they had the big explosion, Santorini, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's European. So are the Greeks and all that stuff. You know, it's like, really there's not any boundary so much, but just areas. But that doesn't declamate that right above that border there's some people, and right below that border, or like blacks like to think that as soon as you get over to the Nile, just on the other side of that, that's all black people, and only black people were there. Because, well, we all come out of Africa. Africa was named by endemic Caucasians that have been there over 30,000 years. Before all that, it was called Libya. If you look on maps, what did blacks call it? They didn't actually even have a name for it. Isn't that messed up? But it's nowhere at the crossroads there. The other crossroad would be between Egypt and the Levant area, and that's the meeting of Asia and Africa, or Libya at the time. But there's no wall there keeping anybody out. And if you were just going around the Mediterranean like fishing around a pond, you'd continue on into there, and well, that's the way it all happened. The only thing is, there's some sub-Saharan people that didn't know any of this existed, and they'd like to lie about it all and interject themselves in anything. And whenever they do, they usually tell you lies like Sumeria's at the crossroads, and it's, well, no, it's at the Fertile Crescent, but it wouldn't be the crossroads. The Levant is kind of the crossroads, because if you were going from Europe down there and not going in the water, you'd be going right through the Holy Land to Egypt, out of Egypt through the Holy Land and up. In fact, usually you'd be going through the Holy Land, catching a ride on that Tigris and Euphrates River, come around the Fertile Crescent and go down to Sumer. So it's really off the side and not what he said at all. But that can be expected in these type of videos that you have from people who don't know anything about even geography or whatsoever, but they're just mouthing off that they were black people somehow. Let's continue.
In respect to Sumerian civilization, however, the black contribution was decisive and far overshadowed that of the later invaders.
So, although to give respect to the ancient blue-eyed Caucasian Sumerian people, their contribution to civilization in the world is really pales in comparison, he says, to the black contribution to Sumer, which actually doesn't exist one bit whatsoever. Over on the left, I don't care how much beard you put on this guy, it looks like Santa Claus a bit. We can tell that's a Caucasian phenotype. Well, all of his pictures are kind of screwed up, double size they're supposed to be, and so on. Hell, he thinks that it's going to read pictures somehow, but yeah, the black contribution, well, there was none. Oh, this is another one of those cases where we just don't have to pander whatsoever because it's preemptive to any black people being known. And if people that are above the Nile, like Nubians, do get known, that doesn't mean West Sub-Saharans got known all of a sudden either, does it? No, it doesn't. But they want to try to loop themselves in with anything external to themselves and really don't want to look at themselves, because that's too telling about the reality of all of this, isn't it? Let's continue.
I would also like to quote John D. Baldwin in his book Prehistoric Nations.
Okay, well, let's hear it. Getting good at that editing yet?
It is now admitted that a people of the Kushite or Ethiopian race, sometimes called Hamites, were the first civilizers and builders throughout Western Asia, and they are traced by the remains of their language, their architecture, and the influence of their civilization on both shores of the Mediterranean, in Eastern Africa and the Nile Valley, in Hindustan, and in the islands of the Indian Seas.
Well, yeah, these are Aryans we're talking about. So incredibly disgustingly, he's trying to end up claiming we was Aryans. We was those blue-eyed Caucasians that apparently, in all of these cases, are attached to the nobility that got it all kicked off. Not to say in these situations everybody was sitting around with their thumb up their ass or anything. They already had it going on, but they hadn't put it together. They may be doing already, gardening and farming and situations like that. May even already had cattle from earlier incursions and so on that go on. But whenever they came down and turned it into a civilization and put all the things together, it made civilization. Therefore, it's founded on that idea. I.e., you can say Sumer got going about 5200, but somewhere after that, before 3200, it kicked in another notch. Right. But who were the nobility of Egypt and all of these places that were concerned? In fact, who are all the people involved anyhow? Well, they're all Caucasians, regardless of their hair color. Yeah, he can't stand that no one has mentioned nappy hair whatsoever. They try to look at pictures like this and yearn over curly hair, and it's like, wow, really? Please stop it. I don't know what he's going to try to show this guy for. He's not black in any way. He's sitting out here on a tree limb on an edge, but it's a serene moment, so it's I guess it's supposed to, I don't know, magically talk black people into believing his BS because there's a white guy here showing it. It's also confusing.
I want to thank all of our Patreon members and paid subscribers. Not only are you helping keep this channel independent...
Oh, he wants to beg for money and things, so that's how he keeps going on this. And he's going to do so for the last minute of this video. So while he does that, let's look at some Sumerian artifacts versus what he just said with his bullshit. Shall we? So here we're looking at Sumerians, and all I typed in was blue-eyed Sumerian. You don't have to put anything else in whatsoever because they know this. It's huge, huge in archaeology that they know this fact that all of the nobility of the Sumerians and their gods and then their priest kings and everybody associated with all are showing this lapis lazuli blue eyes. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. And so that's associated with Proto-Indo-European people to most people, but in reality, preemptive to this situation, preemptive to these 5200 BC was 5600 BC people leaving out of the Black Sea area and the Caucasus Mountains and going a few different places. Yeah. And whenever they did so, they ended up making the pre-Proto-Celts, bell beaker situation, corded ware, and so on like that that's going up west. But also Tocharians and the Anu, which are headed out towards the east and the oriental areas. Down here, and it even shows it, let me zoom in and give you a look. Right there it shows you, and yeah, the Sumerians and the pre-dynastic Egyptians. What? And of course the Aryans and the Indo-Aryans into India. But it wasn't like they were not having contact before that point. I pointed out to people before that the reason that they decided to come in and turn it into a civilization is that these people needed it. And you're trying to trade with somebody who might have this and that and not really have it all going on. And whenever you can see that over here it's working so much better like an incredible engine, people came to gravitate to that. Like people now are trying to gravitate to civilization, which was all brought to you by Caucasians Incorporated. It says here, genetics examined mitochondrial DNA and compared it to the eye color of blue-eyed individuals in countries as diverse as Jordan, Denmark, Turkey, including that people with blue eyes have a single common ancestor that lived by the Black Sea about 10,000 years ago. Well, this one says 8,000 years ago. A lot of them will say 10,000 years ago, which is about 8,000 BC. But others just say that, no, they were blue-eyed coming out of the last ice age, about 10,500 BC. And then, of course, they're all related to this one guy. But there was just one guy with blue eyes? No, it doesn't appear like it works that way. By the way, the Western hunter-gatherers, as far back as we can get DNA out of one, they all had blue eyes too. But it's a different blue eye than the SLC 235 gene or whatever it is in these people and that everybody has now. That's where we get that Cheddar Man idea, but don't get me started. I just made a recent video on Cheddar Man versus the lies that were shown on that and showed you other people that have the exact same genetics and what everybody else portrays them as, but then suddenly Cheddar Man comes on as mahogany somehow. Well, they have a relative to him right here. What does he look like? He ain't mahogany. The guy was a close relative of him. It could be a direct lineage, which is amazing, but then on top of that, he's only living about a half mile away from the cave that they found them in the first place from thousands of years before. Isn't that amazing? So we talked about that blue-eyed idea, and of course, there's blue eyes in the ancient Caucasian Egyptians. All these pictures down across the bottom are all from the earliest of dynasties. That's Nofret, there's Nefer. All of these scribes that they're showing here, Ka'apar, Nefertiti has one blue eye left. All these people have blue eyes into them. It really peters out about the 8th dynasty or so, a little bit before then, and it seems like the first intermediate period ruined it. They had a few left over, used them for the 12th dynasty, and then you don't see them again until the time of Nefertiti. But also there's Thuya, Hatshepsut, Amenhotep, Tutmosis, Ramses, all kinds of blonde and red-headed people in ancient Egypt. In fact, if you wiki hair and just go down to curly, you're going to find that Oprah Winfrey's barber got to reclassify hair for the world. But you'll also see it curly, what they show for curly. And what is it? Well, it's a blonde lady's scalp, like still having her scalp on it. This isn't a wig. But they found it looking like Farrah Fawcett's curly blonde hair, or Marilyn Monroe, or whatever you want to go with. But that's up under a black wig. Might explain a whole lot of things. Maybe whenever you're in Rome, you do as the Romans do, and maybe whenever you're ruling over a black-headed people, it's a kind of a cool idea to be black-headed too, to be one of the group. Seems like that's the way it was taken. So it's not difficult at all to see blue-eyed Sumerians at the earliest of dynasties, at first statues, at everything. And even if you take and you find a statue of Gudea made out of diorite, it's one of the hardest stones at all, just because it's made out of black stone doesn't mean it's a black person anyway. In fact, it's a sign or show of craftsmanship. It's things like 8 on the Mohs scale of hardness. So they're having to use something harder than this diorite to go after it. Yeah. Oh, it's got people thinking all kinds of things like aliens and da-da-da. But the one thing that it'll never be is primitive pre-Neolithic black people. They were the lithic Caucasian heralds of civilization. No, man, it doesn't work that way. But thanks for playing, you know. And you might want to stop doing this because it exposes you as the most insecure, untrustworthy people on the planet, the current clowns of the world, the joke of humanity. And while you're in the middle of being called the joke of humanity, you keep coming out with new things. We were Sumerians. We started that out. I'm guessing how he puts it together is that ancient horners used to be Caucasians, by the way. Yeah. I don't even start to go there. I can prove it, but you could just look at Caucasian race and they'll tell you that they're Egypt through the Horn, all of North Africa, everywhere else. Yeah, and if you try to look up ancient Bantu, it's crazy. It'll go back to 4400 BC with the oldest modern form, and then before that, they're all football-headed, still extant hominids going around about 4 foot tall, little bitty cranium about half the size of anybody. Yep. Now that's how they got E1B genetics. It's because somebody came down there and then humped them into existence. But that's for another video. So, were you able to believe that somehow West Sub-Saharans went lollygagging out and just came to their mind, maybe I'll build a city at the crossroads that isn't a crossroads, is it? Pretty self-exposing. Hey, we'll go on to another one now. Hopefully I don't have to do too many more on this without history guy, because they truly are without history. So if they tried to make a channel and actually put forth their true history, they'd only have a couple of little snips here in a 30-minute video and that'd be it. You could really cover it with all that. Whereas you can see with the amount of videos I've got on studying ancient history, I'm over 5,000 vids, and I'm telling you now, I haven't climbed deep into a lot of these rabbit holes for you. I stopped at a certain point on a lot of these, like layers of onions. Anyhow, let me know what you think down below. Onward. Peace.